Good morning, Tim Kerin here from Mortgage Choice in Kingsley. Today I just want to talk about the WA state budget that was released not too long ago. One of the lenders on our panel, well, a few of the lenders on our panel have been good enough to put together some summaries of the budget and just some kind of key points. So that's the level to which I've studied it. I haven't stayed up late at night reading it word for word, but overall I've got the gist, and so what I want to give you today is my response to that, how that affects a mortgage broker in Kingsley, anecdotally. So if you've come looking for hard science, you've come to the wrong place. As much as I'm a fan of that, that's not what I'm delivering. If you've come for something politically motivated, then you've come to the wrong place as well. I'm simply wanting to have a real think about what I'm reading. Hopefully what I'm reading is accurate, and let you know what that looks like. So a little bit of background first though. I am in Kingsley. Most of the people watching this are from somewhere north of the river in Perth and around the area of Kingsley where I live, where I work, where our office is and where we operate. But if you're watching this from somewhere else or even out of Perth completely and you're not particularly familiar with Perth, if you imagine the west coast of Australia, on the west side of it is the ocean, on the east side is Australia. Perth is on that west coast, and Perth is essentially a settlement. Well, it's not a settlement anymore. When it started, it was a settlement around the Swan River, which effectively runs west to east. It cuts straight into the state. Most people that live in Perth define themselves as being south of the river or north of the river. So for example, when I meet another person who grew up in Perth, I explain to them that I grew up in Willerton, which we know is south of the river, and then I gradually moved house as my life changed further and further north to the point where I'm up in Kingsley now, north of the river. So that's how it works for me, and my school friends, people I grew up with, often hassle me and say I live so far away now, but the reality that I bring them back to is actually I'm just as far north of the city as you are south. It's just that's the geography of Perth. There's probably an article, you can probably find an article on the net somewhere that explains that Perth is the most spread out metropolitan area in the world. What needs to go along with that is that it's probably one of the least dense as well. So we only have a population of a bit over 1 million in Perth, last I checked. Last I counted, but that population is spread out over a very, very large area, and so geography, distance to places makes a big difference. And that informs my response to the first point, which is, morning Mary Helen.
Morning Tim.
That $520.2 million is going to be allocated to build a Yanchep rail extension on the Joondalup line. Now, to me, my first response to that is last time I tried to drive to Yanchep, it took me about 45 minutes from Kingsley, which is already 15 or 20 minutes north of the river. So this may be something that changes the game, finally. There's been a lot of talk about Yanchep and Club Capricorn and Alkimos and all the areas around there for such a long time, longer than I've been alive. And so much of what we see is people struggling to make that dream a reality, and I think this is this is the government's response to the fact that reality is finally happening. There are developers seriously investing in that area now, to the point where it's worth building the freeway all the way up there. So what's that going to mean? It could mean that instead of, as a first home owner who bought a block of land and built in Alkimos maybe 3 years ago, and who has seen probably a bit of a reduction in value and realised just how long it takes to drive into town to go to work, hopefully what can change once this rail extension is complete, and hopefully a freeway to go along with it at some point, is maybe it only takes half an hour to get home from work, and maybe that's so different, and maybe that makes it far more worth living up there. So hopefully that means all the years of investment in the very, very northern suburbs, if you can call them that, of Perth, is now going to be beginning to pay off. The next one that caught my eye was, in addition to $508.2 million for building a new rail car, budget has been allocated for the planning phase of the following projects. It's a list of a few rail extensions. One of them is the Morley to Ellenbrook line. Now that affects me as well, up here north of the river. Ellenbrook is a suburb that I remember when it was just dirt. I've seen plenty of people buy blocks and build houses there over the years, off the back of a lot of promise that infrastructure was going to be extended out there. And Ellenbrook, as its own little place now, is very well established. but getting there is a decent trip from Wanneroo Road down Nangara Road, or a decent trip up from, say, Guildford, or it's not particularly easy to get there, and it takes a while. But if there's a rail going from Morley through to Ellenbrook, that cuts that down a bit. It means people that work in Morley or even work closer into the city are going to find it a bit easier to get to work. So that's good too. 4-year wage freeze for portions of the government sector. I haven't studied which portions they are, but from my perspective that doesn't really come as much of a surprise, because there's a lot of things that haven't been increasing lately, e.g. property prices, e.g. Rent values in Perth. And so it's no surprise that the government doesn't really see a great need to increase wages. I doubt many government employees will be surprised by that either. It doesn't seem too different to what's been going on already in terms of job freezes and so forth. So I don't see that as having a major impact on anyone. That's just the status quo will continue. The introduction of a temporary progressive payroll tax scale for companies with payroll over $100 million a year of 6%, up from 5.5% for 5 years. There's only a small number of businesses that will affect. It doesn't affect me at all. If it ever does affect me, I'll be celebrating, because that will mean I have a business that's that's paying staff over $100 million a year. So watch that space. Foreign property buyers will pay a 4% surcharge on the purchase of residential property in WA. Now, this is forecasted to add $48 million in net additional revenue. I'm wary when I read something like that, because to me something like this, part of the justification for implementing something like this is that it should reduce foreign investment demand on property in Australia. Now that rings true for me, particularly as a mortgage broker, someone in this industry, because we've seen so much impact of the federal government's desire to reduce foreign demand for property in Australia, to reduce local investment property demand, and reduce local interest-only lending demand. There's been a lot of rule changes in the last couple of years toward that. So I think a 4% surcharge there, if it's going to have its intended effect, it will probably reduce demand for people from outside Australia buying property in Australia. So whether that does increase revenue by $48 million or something less than that, because less people are buying property and being taxed on it, I don't know. Most of my customers aren't from overseas, they're from right here in Perth, and so I don't see that having any significant impact on us, except that perhaps it will mean less competition. That if you're a local person trying to buy a local property in Perth, you're not competing with someone that's bringing their money from overseas to do that. So hopefully that's a good thing. What's this? $12 million over 3 years to Tim Kerin at Mortgage Choice in Kingsley. About time. I've been saying that's a good idea for such a long time. It's quite emotional. Yeah, alright, I'll have to go. I'll catch you around. And thank you for putting up with my outstanding acting.